Hey everyone, it's Types, and today we are yet again talking about Dragapult EX because, well, Dragapult EX is quite simply super, super good. Um, kind of broken. I don't know if broken is quite the right word when we kind of dive into that today. When I say broken, I really do mean amazingly powerful and problematic. Generally, I'm not someone who says decks are broken. Well, maybe for thumbnails, I'm not gonna lie. But in terms of actual like power level, I like to keep it fair. Realistically, there's going to be a handful of decks that are better than others, and let's be honest, we all kind of know that, and really like to play different fun decks. There are going to be some very powerful decks, but Dragapult currently in standard, we'll talk about it. It's doing well. It's very powerful. It's definitely a top deck. It's definitely very, very good. And we'll talk about it in current standard and post rotation. It's even better. We're going to take a look at the metagames there. So current standard, this is with this, or I guess I'll look at Phantasmal Flames first. Phantasmal Flames, Dragapult is first. We can see the top four decks here: Dragapult, Goldingo, Charizard, and Gardevoir. And I've talked about this a bunch. These four decks are all good. I think they're still all good in the standard. If we look at Ascended Heroes, the current format, I guess I will mention Play Limitless here has, this is the Ascended Heroes metagame. Some of it wasn't entirely correct. Some of these tournaments in this set of data aren't Ascended Heroes tournaments. Ascended Heroes isn't legal, and some of them in the Phantasmal Flames format actually, I believe, have Ascended Heroes legal as well. So figured I'd mention that there. But anyways, this is Ascended Heroes. I went back tab, so it says the wrong thing. But there we go. Ascended Heroes format. We see Dragapult is played 16% of the time, or 16% of the decks are Dragapult here, and 6% of the decks are Zoroark. So that's a pretty big difference, right? Zoroark is also a deck containing a pretty substantial new card with N's Zekrom. We see that card here. It's not necessarily the heart and soul of the deck or anything. I mean, Zoroark is, obviously, but I do believe that this deck is being played more because it's gotten a new piece, or I suppose a few new pieces from the new expansion there. So, in some sense, that deck is going to be inflated. If you look at Phantasmal Flames, we can see a deck like, what was a new deck? I like Mega Sharpedo, right? Mega Sharpedo is not the 15th best deck of the game. It's not very good. 15th best isn't like super good, but it is overplayed here. I imagine most people would agree on that. In Ascended Heroes, we see the same thing, right? We see I talked about this in my last video, but you could see, I guess, Rocket's Honchkrow is overplayed. Something like Mega Dragon, I would definitely say it's overplayed. It's not played that much, but it's cool. It's fun, and it's new. That's why people are playing it. But that also, I think, applies to ends here. I don't think it's a huge deal because, again, it is only a small part of the deck, but it is a somewhat meaningful part of the deck there. So then you look at the next deck beyond that, you see like Goldengo, you see Marnies, you see Gardevoir, you see Absol, Mega Absol Box, you see Charizard, Alakazam. You see some like different decent decks here. I will also mention that some people are prepping for post rotation, so in that sense, you could say Dragapult could be a little inflated in terms of its plays, and I think that would also apply to Mega Lucario some as well. But Dragapult is certainly very good in standard, right? It's good. I would also say the deck is fun, personally. That is obviously subjective. When I say fun, I mean fun to play with. In terms of playing against it, we'll talk about that some. But I got a standard list here, a pretty standard list here. Where we see Dragapult EX, we see obviously Drakloak there as well, and we'll talk about what they do. I guess I should say what Dragapult does. EX does, if you're not familiar with it, has the attack Phantom Knife for Fire Psychic here. This is a stage 2. It is a Terra. The fact that it's a Terra doesn't really matter very much. It could matter, but again, it probably doesn't matter too much there. The Phantom Knife for 2 energy, again, 2 different types there. You put 6 damage cards on your opponent's bench, quick one in any way you like. This is quite useful for doing, quite simply, pretty decent damage active. It doesn't do absurd damage active, but it does decent damage active. And it does bench damage in the form of damage counts, which is harder to counter. There aren't really any true counters to this card. We'll kind of talk about some. I guess I'll quickly mention in terms of counters to the damage counters, which saying this is getting all confusing terminology wise, but in terms of a way to have counterplay there, you have something like Battle Cage. Battle Cage will stop Dragapult EX's damage cards being placed on the bench. That's only 60 out of the 260 total damage though, so it does something. It certainly slows it down, and it will slow down some of the, or I guess stop some of the other pieces. Looking at Dusknoir here. Oh, this is also an average list. Yeah, this is the average list, now I remember. So this does not necessarily play 60 cards. Looks like it doesn't play more than 4 of a card. I've seen that happen before. But you see, Dusknoir here to go after Bench Pokemon and Dusclops, and Monkey Dory as well in some sense, and you have Battle Cage to potentially stop that. In a deck like Alakazam here, you're going to be playing Battle Cage because Dragapult's going to be really bad for you, but it doesn't turn it into like some super awesome, amazing matchup. If we look at the matchup, it's still bad even when you're running a bunch of Battle Cages and like Enhanced Hammer as well. So Battle Cage can do something. It's not going to completely win you the game because, if you're playing Dragapult, you can just bump the stadium. So defensive stadiums only do so much. This is also true for the stadium Nighttime Mine. I think Nighttime Mine is a pretty underrated stadium, in my opinion, though I don't think it's super good. I played it some, and I can say it feels okay, I guess. It says it attaches by terrors, costs 1 colorless more. I think the stadium is underrated, and if other people have played it, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts in the comment section on this card. And if you haven't played it, I'd recommend trying it out. It's a card I think a lot of people don't know exists, but it's a new card from Ascended Heroes. Again, increasing the attack cost of Terras. Looking at the current metagame, there are the main Terra is Dragapult. There's also like Charizard, but the effectiveness there is somewhat questionable. And I also do have the post-rotation metagame here. We see some Terras and stuff like that a little bit, but a lot of those have stadiums. It's mostly there to counter Dragapult, but I think it does an okay job there. Then there is also there's some other counterplay, but we'll get to that after, because we also need to talk about Dracloak. I think now is a good time to talk about that. Dracloak isn't loading apparently, but oh, there we go. It's the ability of Recon Directive, letting you once during your turn look at the top, or once during your turn per Dracloak. So you can use multiple Recon Directive abilities per turn. You can look at the top 2 cards of your deck, put one into your hand, put the other on the bottom. This lets you draw an extra card every turn per Dracloak, which is pretty good, but it lets you see 2 cards. So in some sense, it lets you draw 2 cards. Yes, you don't get to choose both if they're both important. You're looking for a few pieces, and you find them both off the same Dracloak. Obviously you only get one there, but if you're digging for a specific card, then you can use a bunch of Dracloaks and essentially draw 2 cards with this ability. And with a deck like Dragapult EX in current standard, you could, for example, be digging for Neo Upper Energy. You could be digging for Dusknoir. You could be digging for Rare Candy if you're playing that. So there's different things you could be doing there. And ultimately, Dracloak is pretty good at finding those. Dracloak as a draw engine is good. It's not broken. It's not even usually a standalone draw engine. I guess looking at current standard, it's I assume I'm not going to find a deck very easily that plays Dracloak and not Dragapult EX. Okay, here we found one, which is Ethan's here, using a 2/2 Dracloak line as a draw engine. But this is obviously pretty rare. Looking at post-rotation, which, by the way, if you didn't know, you can find post-rotation decks. You click on a cards page or whatever on Limitless here, then you can click on City League deck lists at the bottom. But looking here, I wonder if we actually will find post-rotation or a deck playing just Dracloak. Yeah, I think these two do. Potentially, actually, does this one? No, this one doesn't. But this one here does. I actually talked about this deck in a video running the Dracloak engine. Definitely a weird deck, but yeah, you can check that video out if you haven't seen it. So post-rotation, there's maybe a little Dracloak. Maybe there's not as much as I thought. Okay, and I'm getting distracted. I was not expecting Dragapult Garchomp. But, it is a nice piece, but if it was truly amazing, then we'd see it in other decks. Or there is the other question of, if you want to play Dracloak, then you should probably just play Dragapult, right? Like, if you want to put Dracloak into your Charizard EX deck as an engine piece, then, play Dragapult EX. It's really good. So, Dracloak is good. Dragapult is really amazing. In fact, Dragapult EX has seen play without Dracloak with Regidrago V-Star. That's different, but it still is, I think, worth mentioning. I like to mention it there. But ultimately, Dracloak is good. And these two obviously are played together because they're part of the same evolution line. And so when you're playing Dragapult EX, you get Dracloak alongside it. And I guess I will, in terms of the power level of Dracloak, also mention Pidgeotto from that team up, maybe something like that. I don't remember the exact set, but anyways, with that card, you're able to do the same thing. That card actually did see play all on its own, though it was like I'd say a mediocre draw engine. So I'd say Dracloak is a mediocre draw engine, though we don't have too many super powerful ones in standard either. I guess Enzoric EX is also good, but it is on a 2-prizer. And again, with that card slash deck, if you're playing Enzoric EX, you're presumably playing an Enzoric EX deck, because it's like somewhat committal to be playing. And once you're playing it, why don't you just play that as your deck? So ultimately, I want to mention that there. But obviously, there's other stuff going on with this deck here. And you have the Dusknoir line as well as Badoo, which are very, very powerful for this deck. I think they're both very powerful. And looking at post-rotation, we see the deck looks, here's a sample list. I think a lot of lists look kind of like this. we see that they are pretty similar, I guess. Obviously, you're not running Neo upper end, or no, you're not running Luminous Energy. So slotting in Monkey Dory is more difficult. And Monkey Dory is also a counter to Dragapult EX. I will mention that. I think that's its primary role in the Pokemon TCG. Well, I don't know. I suppose if you're playing a deck like if you're playing Gardevoir, then it's there for damage. Same thing with Marnies, or I guess any Frostlass deck. Frostlass is moderately popular, not like hugely popular. Gardevoir is also pretty popular, but it is rotating. And I guess I'll just say I haven't said this yet that looking at the metagame with the top decks of the Phantasmal Flamestorm, which I think represents the metagame pretty well. Gholdengo, Charizard, and Gardevoir are all rotating, so those decks are being filled somewhat by Dragapult, somewhat by other decks, but a lot by Dragapult because it's very, very good there. But with these powerful pieces pre-rotation, they're not rotating. And Dragapult's not really losing much. It is losing Luminous, and you upper. In my mind, they kind of go together because they are special energies. Because with Luminous, that's it's a special energy, not a basic energy, so you can't accelerate to your Pokemon. With Crispin using Luminous energy, so Crispin isn't really played in Dragapult and Standard. But then we see post-rotation here, we got Crispin as a centerpiece of the deck, as well as Rose's Encouragement. We see a copy of that. I personally don't think it's super good in the deck, but it can allow you to do some stuff. And then we also see the loss of Iono. I suppose the loss of Iono is pretty big. It's a 4 in Dragapult pretty normally, but losing that, you're replacing it with... Okay, I guess I will mention this list is a Ninja Spinner / Chaos Rising list running Special Red Card. So Special Red Card will not be out with rotation, which is or immediately with rotation internationally or in Japan. With when that comes around, because Japan is like ahead of us by it's by about a set, but it's actually currently more than a set. So you will just have to rely on Unfair Stamp, which Unfair Stamp is the main ace spec being played, or one of the main ace specs. It's the main one. It's the main one. It's being played a bunch. I guess with Special Red Card, I think it's slowing down a little bit, but ultimately Unfair Stamp is the main source of hand disruption. And also you don't have Arven, so you can't really search it out. I mean, you kind of can. You have Petrol, but ultimately Unfair Stamp, I think, fills that role okay. You can still play some good supporters. Laser Determination is going to be the main one. But with worse supporters, that makes your deck weaker, but it also makes their opponent's deck weaker. It means that they're relying potentially more on items. And item search is still going to be very powerful post-rotation. Budabay, Puffin, Pokeball, and Ultra Ball, which you see this list running 4 copies of. Yes, you are losing Nest Ball for setup, but you do have those other 3 options there. This means that you're relying more on items because you have less powerful supporters, which means Badoo's going to stop you more, right? So Badoo is even better post-rotation than it is pre-rotation. And that is definitely a very big reason why Dragapult is so good. And Dragapult helps it out a lot because you're able to have that as an engine, a pretty low setup cost engine that works well with a long game, which Badoo creates longer games. I made a video, or in my video yesterday, talked about like walls and Pokemon that slow the game down. They don't necessarily add 4 decisions there, though, because both players aren't really doing their game plan. I mean, Badoo, I guess, can be part of your game plan, but then you're not using, Dragapult EX attack, or, you're not really doing stuff with your energy too much. I mean, you could be attaching energies, but you're not getting the payoff of the attack, or presumably not the payoff of Monkey Dory either there, which is fine, but not like some huge payoff, even if you are getting that, especially with just one energy to use it there. So with Badoo, you're ultimately just mostly slowing the game down, but that means there's more turns, and then more turns to use Drakloak, and get your board set up. So that helps this card out as well, which a lot of other decks don't really have draw engines like that. There is, as I mentioned, Enzoric EX, but then there's also something like, say, Lunatone. There are draw engines. There's a bunch of different draw engines. A lot of them either are a bit more, I don't know if fragile is the right word, but like, they're searching for stuff like, say, Noctowl or Meowth EX and being hit by hand disruption in the form of Badoo, obviously a different form of hand disruption that's like, say, Iono, and those paired together can be very powerful. But if you are hit by Badoo, then that's going to limit your options and slow you down, and then there's not too much your opponent can do to actually punish that there. And you can also set up your Duststorm line. Duststorm, I think, is super powerful in Dragapult. It was seeing a little bit of a fall off within Dragapult at a point, but with Badoo, you want to be setting up for something. mentioned you're not setting up for big energy stuff. You're only two energies. Yes, two energies is more than one turn of attachment. It's 2 turns, unless you have Crispin there, which can get you there in 1 turn. But, if you Badoo a bunch of turns, you're going to kind of run out of reasons to want to slow the game down, other than slowing your opponent down, but you're also slowing yourself down there. But if you have something like Dustnor, which can get you value by setting up theoretically repeatedly and punishing your opponent in their bench, which I guess I will mention as well. You are losing Countercatcher. Countercatcher is also good for this deck in standard pre-rotation. You are going to replace obviously with Boss's Orders and rely on that a bit more, especially with other weaker supporters that you're playing in your deck. Like I would say, I mean, Crispin is a decent supporter, but within Dragapult EX, it's more of okay than some decks that really rely on Crispin. But then you also see that you have I don't know, you don't have too much else going on in supporters that I wouldn't say Dawn or anything is at the same power level as Iono. Iono's potentially the best card in standard right now. I don't know where I'd rank it. I from time to time make rankings of the top cards in standard, but it's pretty hard to do. But ultimately, you got a lot of good stuff in the deck. You can control the game. Ultimately, though, a lot of these things are coming from Badoo and also just generally good cards. The deck just plays a lot of good cards. I would say that the current standard Dragapult list plays a lot of the best cards in the game. You look at Lilia's Determination and Iono, and again, being a slower deck, you can use those pretty well. Same thing with Countercatcher. These are all amazingly powerful cards, specifically when they're used at their peak, which Dragapult is using. And then you also see Pokemon Search. It's going to be playing the best Pokemon Search in the game. I suppose that applies to a lot of decks, but you are going to see it within Dragapult here, and it's running, all these powerful trainers. I'd say like the only weak trainer it's running would be something like, say, Hilda. Hilda is just like a moderately powerful card. I actually don't play Hilda, but in terms of power level, it's definitely weaker than like Iono and Lily's. It's an okay card. Obviously, it's here for Neo Up Energy and an extra out to that there. But for the most part, it's just playing good, powerful cards. And Dragloak, Dragapult EX, Badoo, and Dustnor, I would say, are all very powerful cards. And like Pheasant Dipty EX, Latias EX, Blood Luna EX, these are all just good cards. Something like Palucha is going to be a bit more synergy heavy, relying on the damage counters from Dragapult EX, and then compounding off of that. But ultimately, it is still a decent card that has seen play in some different decks throughout the course of its time in standard. Also, that is not like a huge loss. Overall, there aren't too many big losses. But then we need to talk about one of the other counters as well as the metagame. And one of the counters that gets brought up a lot is Liz Clefairy EX. Liz Clefairy EX is a card that is theoretically very good with the ability Fairy Zone. If you're not familiar with how this works, or not how this works, but why it is the way it is that so Dragapult EX doesn't have a weakness, right? Normally, Dragon Pokemon in Standard don't. Previously, though, they were weak to the Fairy type, which is now no more, which I am very pleased about. But ultimately, this type was the weakness for Dragon Pokemon, then again removed. And then Fairy Pokemon, it was removed because the type was removed. And then the type was the Psychic Pokemon, or Fairy Pokemon switched to Psychic Pokemon. So Fairy Pokemon from the video game are now Psychic Pokemon in the TCG weak to Metal, versus the ones that were Psychic from the video game, which are still Psychic in the TCG, are weak to darkness and resistant to fighting. So I wanted to mention that there. But anyways, so we see Liz Clefairy EX essentially bringing back the fairy weakness kind of with Psychic. Obviously, it messes with some stuff there. Ultimately, this can one-shot Dragapult EX relatively easily. It is still 2 energies, though. And also, it gets one-shotted by Dragapult EX. Yes, currently in Standard, there is Bravery Charm. I don't think it matters too much because you could, like, jamming Tower it or something. But then post-rotation that isn't even a thing there. Looking at the metagame also here, looking at the original metagame post-rotation, this is what it looked like. Dragapult has fallen off a little bit. We see Dragapult, and then we see Raging Bull and like Lucario or Mega Lucario being there, like Team Rockets, and so they're like kind of there, but not really. You need to add a bunch of decks till you get to the power level or the percentage level of Dragapult EX there. Looking with the inclusion of Chaos Rising here, actually, as well as or slash Ninja Spinner there, which is again not the format we're going to be playing in immediately. We see that Mega Lucario is back up a little bit more there, which is like fine. It is also weak to Psychic, so that's something. I don't know if that's good or bad for it. I don't think it's great for it. But if you're playing Psychic, then you can hit weakness on both Dragapult EX and Mega Lucario EX there. And this is, looking at by the way, these are just based on play rates on Pokemon Book here in the in Japanese tournaments. We see that Dragapult EX is obviously being played a lot more than the B tier decks. There's a whole tier gap, which is kind of crazy. We see that Mega Lucario is like back there, but it definitely feels a lot closer to B tier than A tier in my opinion. Dragapult EX, I would say, is specifically a very, very high power or high percentage play A tier or S tier deck here. I would say normally I wouldn't include decks in S tier. I mean, I would do for like thumbnails, and I guess in terms of analysis, I do some. But in terms of S tier, you could definitely say that it's like a tier 0 deck. I guess that term is more clear. S tier is kind of, used in a lot of different situations. But with the Dragapult EX, post rotation is looking like a tier 0 S tier deck there. And then ultimately, to get to the question of is this deck good for the game or not? In terms of power level, it is very powerful. We talked about all the reasons it's powerful. Um, is it, how good is it to play against? I suppose I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section. Obviously, decks are very powerful. People tend to get a little sick and tired of. And certainly Dragapult is not a new deck. It is the newest of the top decks, I guess, but that just means it's going to be amazing post rotation, with the loss of those other decks. So looking at the post rotation metagame, I think it will potentially be a little problematic because it's just so powerful. In terms of gameplay patterns, though, I think they're all right. You look at the deck, you see good cards, but like Badoo is annoying. I would definitely say Badoo is a little annoying, or it's pretty annoying. I don't know if it's good for the game. There are definitely questions to be asked about that. I think it's debatable, but I think there are reasons why it can be good for the game. But again, that's not for today's discussion here. But ultimately, you're able to do really powerful stuff and really obliterate your opponent's board. There's counterplay. There's counterplay to Dusknoir. There will be counterplay to Munkidori, which is another card people have complained about a lot. And again, Munkidori though is a counter to Dragapult in some sense. I do think the new Patrat, which is the counter to Munkidori, will potentially make Dragapult better. Though I'm not super sold on that, but I think that could be the case. Will Munkidori is all right in Dragapult. I think it's better against Dragapult than it is for Dragapult there. Then I think Dusknoir though is better for Dragapult. As I said, some lists weren't playing it. I do think that the deck is too powerful. In terms of play patterns, though, I think it's okay. You can kind of play around some of the stuff that it's doing. Though ultimately, if your opponent just item locks you and then wipes your board, there's nothing you can really do about it. So in that sense, it is annoying as well. Spread can be annoying there. It's not super spread heavy, but it does like decent damage. I feel like it's a well-rounded, but like not jack of all trades, but like a king of all trades. It's very, very powerful. So definitely, I would say overpowered to a potentially problematic level. Though in terms of gameplay patterns, I think it can be kind of cool. I like having good draw engines in the game that increases consistency, but it's not like a broken draw engine either. So ultimately, though, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section because obviously this is something that everyone's going to have different takes on. But I hope you enjoyed. Make sure you like, subscribe, hit the bell, all the good stuff. And as always, I'm excited to see you in the next video.